Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Commander Conversations. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the philosophies of the format and how we approach the game socially. But before we get into that, please make sure that you've liked the video, subscribed to the channel, and that you hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future episodes of Commander Conversations or just another EDH show. One of the best things about the format of Commander is that we have access to nearly every Magic card that's ever been printed for our decks. So naturally, this is going to create a lot of different topics for debate as far as their place within the format goes. There's always going to be conversations about specific cards and whether or not they go against the spirit of the format. I think everyone on both sides raises excellent points, since it's always worth exploring multiple opinions in an effort to broaden our horizons on any given subject. That being said, I feel like there's a larger conversation we as players should be having, and that's about our understandings of the core format philosophies. I'm not talking about how many mana rocks you should run, what your creature count should be, or what the average CMC should look like. I'm talking about the reason this format was created in the first place. Before we get into that, I feel like I should point out, I personally don't care what people play. I believe Magic is like art, and that the beauty is in the self-expression we create. I don't believe there's such a thing as a bad card, or a card that negatively impacts the format. What I do believe is that almost all cards are designed in a way that they can have varying social implications depending on the pod in which they're being played and the intentions of the player playing them. Thankfully, as Commander players, we have some guidance for how the game should go, courtesy of the man who created the game and the group who curates the ban list for us, Sheldon and the Rules Committee. So let's talk about that. On the Commander Rules Committee page, under the Philosophy of Commander section, the first thing it says in bold letters is Commander is for fun, before adding, each game is a journey the players share, relying on a social contract in which each player is considerate of the experience of everyone involved. This promotes player interaction, intergame variance, a variety of play styles, and a positive communal atmosphere. At the end of an ideal Commander game, someone will have won, but all participants will have had the opportunity to express themselves through their deck building and gameplay. Essentially, we don't get to play unless 3 other people invest an hour or 2 of their time into our shared experience. So we need to be considerate of theirs. That goes for everybody at the table though. This format philosophy is an objective fact. We can choose not to believe in it or build our decks that go against it, and that's okay. But we need to understand that in doing so, we're going against the core philosophies of the format, and that may have unfortunate consequences. It's one thing to play Azorius Control against your regular group of friends who you're comfortable with and who know what to expect from one another. But it's the absolute last thing I would personally pick to play in any setting where I'll be playing with someone entirely new. Unless we establish that's what we want to play from the onset with a proper Rule Zero conversation. We should want people to be interested in playing another game with us rather than frustratingly picking up their cards and silently walking away, right? The other thing we need to be considerate of is the fact that our playstyle reputation can follow us, and this is a pretty small community. I've seen it happen where people are denied even a first chance with a pod because pre-existing members remember the way they play from a past experience and identify that it isn't going to be a fit. I look at finding people to play with and developing a playgroup as a lot like dating. Without communication and compromise, it just isn't going to work, especially if you're only there to take care of your own needs. The same can be said for EDH. Both are going to be failures if the people involved go in with conflicting beliefs of how it should go without an ability to compromise. If you find a group of people who regularly refuse to let you play the style of game you want, then you need to make a tough choice as to whether or not that group is right for you, or if you're willing to make compromises in your deck building. The same as you would any relationship, I suppose. There's nothing wrong with some self-reflection either, and asking ourselves if maybe showing up with only Sense triplets and light pods every week to play against our friends out-of-the-box precons is the problem. Unfortunately, there's also a lot of people who are limited in their options of people to play with because of where they live. My family and I just moved not too recently from an island where only one person within about a half an hour of us played. But then there's online dating for stuff out there, spell table for that. But even then, these same courtesies and understandings of the format philosophies should still be present within all of us. my suggestion to players who are going to be playing with new people is to always try and bring at least 2 decks if possible, with one of them being built as a low interaction, low feels bad deck, where you can use it to at least get a feel for the pod while not stepping on any toes and not risk ruining the experience for anyone else, and then bringing whatever else you want to bring on top of it. For me, my personal favorite deck in this situation is Sithis Harvest Hand. Sure, it's Selesnya janky enchantments, but my win cons are janky, I don't run interaction, and the deck is built in a way where I'm not restricting my opponent's abilities to do anything inside the game of Magic, except maybe targeting my enchantments or attacking me. But again, I'm not stopping anyone from doing what they showed up to do, and that's play Magic. I've been to pods where I felt comfortable asking if they wanted to play my more toxic decks after the first game. Some pods said yes. Other pods looked at me like I'd brought homemade Pepsi to a party, and I as a player have no choice but to be okay with this. But at least by doing things this way, I'm not going to be ruining anyone else's experience. The same can be said for playing at an LGS. Though, I believe we should operate with even more consideration while at an LGS, since this is where we're likeliest to encounter younger kids and people who've just discovered Magic. The 2 types of players we should always be setting out to inspire within our game, since we should all want to see the game grow. The absolute last thing we want is to turn someone off of our beautiful game before they've had a chance to even really discover it. This is where the philosophy of Commander becomes so important, because we need to remember and remind ourselves that it isn't just about us and our own experiences. When we sit down to play a game of Commander, especially in a public setting, there's an expectation that we should all be playing with an understanding of this. Again, not to say you can't, but it's a small world, and we never know when we may find ourselves relying on those people if we want to play another game down the line. If we want to reflect on ourselves and how we have an impact on these situations socially, then we should start by asking ourselves, what is it that's motivating us when we sit down to build a deck? Did we see a new card preview that sparks fires of curious creativity inside of us? Or are we motivated by the idea of seeing 3 other players emptily gaze forward into the abyss, waiting for the sweet cold embrace of being swung upon for lethal? Well, there's good news. Like I've said multiple times, but it's worth repeating, there's nothing wrong with either, or any other reason you decide to build a commander. But where we lose our way is in our application of these choices. When building a deck, do we want to win? Do we want to have a good time? Do we want to be the only one having a good time? I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to win. I certainly don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to have a good time. But where you'll need to convince me is on the idea that there's nothing wrong with deliberately setting out to ruin other people's experiences, especially if they're not okay with it. Let's take Terra Grid for example. A card that reads, whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may put that card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Now, right out of the gate, you can see how this card has earned its ranking on the SALT list, since you're not only working to stop people from playing their own cards, but stealing them to use for yourself. Is it a problem card? Absolutely not. Is it ruining the format? There's only one place I can think to go that'll entertain that argument. But there's no denying that it's a card that you can't build without going directly against the spirit of the format, since there's realistically only 2 ways to build Terra Grid, and that's through forcing your opponents to discard with cards like Smallpox, Dark Deal, and Awakening the Erstwhile, or through forcing permanent sacrifice with cards like Torment of Hailfire, Killing Wave, or Smokestack. And these aren't everyone's idea of a good time. As a Terra Grid player myself, this is a deck that I rarely play, since I understand the effect it can have on a social situation. I always ask my playgroup if they're okay with me playing it. It's a deck I built knowing wholeheartedly what it does, but also a deck I built knowing I'd only get to bring it out in special circumstances. I know the possibility exists that players may not want to play against something like that, and I get it. I'm a married father of 2, so there are times where I just want to cast big dumb spells with my friends, not be stopped from playing the game I set out to play in the first place. So I'm respectful of that, because I understand there are players out there who will let me play it. At the end of the day, I'm here for the gathering. So to me it's less about the decks that I get to play and all about the company I get to enjoy while playing those decks. Commanders like this, or any playstyle that is largely going to restrict other players from playing Magic, are the kinds of things that we need to be really careful about when choosing how we build them if we're not always sure who we're going to be playing them against. It's not the kind of commander you should pick, or the way you should choose to build a deck if you're planning to go play with strangers, whether it be a new group, an LGS, or even over spell table. Again, not to say that you can't do it, but you'll quickly find that every seat at every pod is quickly taken when other players see you walk through that door. I'm not saying you need to build every single deck to be a group hug deck or to cater to the other players, just to keep in mind who your target audience is when you're building the deck. The same can be said for every playstyle though. This is why player and pod selection over card selection can be so important. Like if you bring a weenie girdling token deck to a meta dominated by EDH players. In which case, we also need to remember that once you've reached a specific power level, a lot of these social contracts go out the window, because a lot of these formats exist to emphasize winning above all else. Like a comedian crafting their set, you've got to craft your deck with the ability to read the room in which you're planning to play it. But what if our situation limits us to only being able to build one deck? Again, there's no wrong answer in what you choose to build, but we need to understand that our choice in what we build is going to potentially limit our options of people to play with. If we choose to build a janky dinosaur pirates deck and the only local pod is 3 other people playing 8s and 9s, you're not going to have a good time trying to match up to them, and they're not going to enjoy watching you sit there either. So to summarize, build whatever you want. There's no wrong way to play the game, and so long as everyone at the table is having fun, not much else matters. The experience of the group as a whole is paramount, and there are a lot of people forcing their playstyle, regardless of what it is, into round peg and square hole type situations who really need to have their EDH Ghosts of Christmas Past visit. Your time is valuable, and you don't owe it to anyone. For the same reason I say no every time my wife asks if I want to go on the roller coaster, I'm not going to knowingly spend my time doing something I know I won't enjoy. So remember, the magic is fantastic, but we're all here to enjoy the gathering, or at least we should be, because the gathering is what this format is all about. Thank you everybody for listening. Again, please make sure that you like the video, that you comment your thoughts down below, you subscribe to the channel, and make sure you hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future episodes of Commander Conversations or just another EDH show. Thanks everyone. Have a good week.